everyone, and welcome to Understanding the Business Environment. Today, we're lucky to be here with Lenny Elario, who's the Senior Fundraising Lead at the Red Cross, which I think we all know what the Red Cross does, so it doesn't need a lot of introduction. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to Lenny about, which I think is really interesting, is the fact that Lenny and his team work on things that are related to economics and specifically behavioral economics, which is the topic that we're going to be covering this week in class. So thank you so much, Lenny, for coming along virtually. You're in Sydney. And thanks for sharing your time and thoughts with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's really our pleasure, and we're really happy that you can do this. I wanted to start our conversation a little bit with a discussion of sort of applied economics in the real world, and I think nothing says applied more than behavioral work. So one of the things that I like to think about is what economics or economists can bring to a team. So it's this two-sided world, right? We have a conceptual understanding of the world, which is informed by theory, and then we use that theory to build empirical models, which we test using a scientific approach. Now, in orthodox economics, or more traditional or neoclassical economics, or what students in class would have seen up until today, we learn about sort of a very rational person, which has been dubbed the Homo economicus. And this very rational person, what she or he does is that it has a pretty good understanding of the world, of what other people are going to be doing, and responds to various incentives accordingly. And this can be pretty useful to understand policies and stuff like that, but it's not always useful. And I think behaviorals do this thing where they also take the approach of looking at the world conceptually, and then to build a theory, and then do some empirical work afterward. But this Homo economicus person sort of goes out the window. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, how that works and how that informs the actual practice of understanding the world empirically that follows.
Sure. Well, the very first thing that comes to mind is, as a fundraiser, obviously my role is to inspire supporters of Red Cross or any other charity to give. And the way I would frame it is that when you're asking someone to give to a charity, which they're not actually going to benefit from that gift, it's going against that very rational mindset of it's a transaction. I give money to get something back. With the charity, it's very different because they're not actually receiving anything from the charity other than actually having an impact on the world. So it's not a direct result of whatever they're giving to that charity. And so when you are actually, inspiring these individuals in the world to care about your cause, to care about the humanitarian impact that they can make on the world, you're actually trying to play with something else that's going on inside their mind. And for us, it's about the one that comes to mind immediately is social norming. So trying to normalize the act of actually giving to charity, that it is an actual normal thing to do and to want to do. And so in one of the areas that I've worked in the past, which is around bequests or including a gift in will to a charity, you might social norm the fact that many others, just like that person, are doing this one act, that they are inspired to include a gift in will so that after they passed, long after they're dead, they're actually going to think about, or that they will actually have a humanitarian impact on the world. And so that's one thing that we do. So if we speak to a supporter in person or over the phone or through our communications more broadly, we will social norm the idea that there are 1,000 other people just like you who care and have decided to do this one action. And we find that this social norming does impact their behavior. As soon as they know that others just like them are doing it, they're more likely to do it.
Oh, that's really interesting, Lenny. So just to unpack this a little bit for students, what you have here is really a conceptual idea, a hypothesis, if you will, The hypothesis is that once an individual knows that others are behaving in that way, then that individual is more likely to increase their supply of funds to charities like the Red Cross. So that's the concept, that's the theory. And it's interesting because it is entirely a behavioral theory in the sense that we're not saying that they're getting something in return, or this transaction like when you buy M&Ms or whatever. This is a little bit different, right? It's saying, here, do this, others are doing it, and you might you might feel good about doing it when you're doing it, but you won't actually experience doing it because you'll be dead. Yep. And then you test this in the real world by talking to people, and then you find that this incentive sort of works. And that's really the next approach. So you start with a concept, and then you apply it to the real world, and you observe outcomes. And since the outcomes are good for the charity, you guys sort of continue doing it. What do you often I guess take a risky approach to this sort of thing? Do you guys ever have like a coffee in the morning and think, wow, you know what would work? This funky idea. Should we try it? Does that happen a lot in your space?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical to test. Just test, have a hypothesis of the impact of a certain decision, test it in the real world, and then see what the result is. And then if the result is overwhelmingly better, that you've tested this hypothesis and the result is such, then you just apply it more broadly. And I guess I don't work in the digital space, but I do have, there are digital fundraisers here at Red Cross who will be testing online and different experiences for each supporter on the website. And they'll see which test actually performed better and then apply it. And so there will be behavioral economics that's going into the experience for that person on the website. So it's either it's A/B testing or multivariate testing.
Right, that's really interesting. So just to get back to this A/B testing stuff, this is huge in business, not just in charities. It's basically about understanding causal inferences. Yep. In the sense that does A cause B? And in the applied economics world, this is really where it's at. We want to understand whether my intervention leads to an outcome, because otherwise we might be wasting our time. In your setting, for example, if you think that telling people that creating a social norm works, but then we find out it doesn't, then you guys are sort of wasting your time. People were going to give anyway, right? Yep. So with A/B testing in particular, in causal inferences, one of the things we worry about are confounders, so other factors that could be influencing the world and behavior. And sort of before cameras started rolling, we were chatting a little bit about things like an economic crisis, inflation, COVID. How do you guys deal with these external shocks, and how do you adapt your expectations as to how people are going to respond to these, and as a result, adapt your programs? I mean, these things are all connected, right? The money is used for something that's very useful at the end. So if it's not coming in, or you expect it to come in, there's going to be outcomes that we need to think about. So how does this external factor influence your practice, and how do you cope with random shocks?
Cost of living is obviously a very key topic that's on the mind for so many charities. We're constantly trying to predict the consequences of external factors on how our charity is going to perform in fundraising, which is absolutely critical for that charity to continue operating. If we can't raise money, the charity doesn't exist. And so we're always trying to understand, well, what is the cost of living going to impact? Who is it going to impact the most of our supporters? And so we'll be testing through different appeals. Most recently, we had an appeal just before Christmas, the festive appeal, and we're looking at the response rates according to different segments of supporters. So the lower value supporters were seeing a drop in response rate, or new donors that were coming on board were giving at a lower value. They might be giving far less than they were expected. And that's going to impact our budgets for the next financial year. And so when it comes to, how do we actually respond to this challenge? It's really around the framing of the language that we appeal to these supporters, framing it in different ways. So one idea that's on our mind at the moment is framing in terms of, we understand that, you know, the cost of living is impacting individuals across Australia. It might be impacting you, but it's also impacting charities like Red Cross, who are trying to raise money, and it's becoming more expensive for us to operate. And so that's a reason enough to give, even if it's a smaller amount. Please donate. And so there's a change in framing. Rather than maybe asking for more, you might just say, hey, cost of living is impacting us as well. It's impacting and therefore creating greater need within the community. Greater number of Australians who are feeling impacted by cost of living. Therefore, they're coming to organisations like Red Cross and seeking support. So it's impacting us both in our operations and in the greater number of people coming to us for that support. And so I guess it's that framing of, we know it's impacting you, but it's impacting a lot more people who are probably doing it worse off than you. So I think it's a language framing.
Oh, that's very interesting. You know, you mentioned just now this really interesting concept about different types of donors. So one of the lessons that I really like about behavioral economics is thinking about the world as a place where we can run experiments, which has both control and treatment groups, right? And now, thanks to the pandemic, I think we all understand control and treatment groups, because that's how vaccines got tested. And so basically now, when it comes to understanding this, do you guys ever think, all right, we're going to have a certain appeal that is more likely to benefit this type of demographic, you know, say women, older people, richer people, poorer people, whatever, foreign people, local people, and then we'll have a control group just to see what the potential effect of our intervention is. Do you guys ever approach you know, fundraising in that regard, or is that more playing in the background?
It's definitely in the mix when you're thinking of your audience targeting and the language that you might apply, and then testing it in the real world. For example, with those supporters that are wealthier and therefore give more, you might frame the language in terms of not so much as a gift to charity, but as an investment in having a greater impact in something that you care about. And you'll test that language and see if it does actually resonate with that target audience. And that is one of the things that we do.
That's interesting. With people responding in different ways to messaging, have you guys ever been shocked as to, you know, something maybe not working the way you expected it? Maybe it just worked really, really well, or maybe it didn't work well enough, and you thought, okay, let's quickly change this. What lessons do we learn? How did sort of an understanding of behavioral economics help you adapt to those lessons?
Good question. I'm trying to think of one. Yeah, I need to think about that one and come back to you. Yeah.
All right, sounds good. Well, while you do, I want to ask you a little bit about the sort of people you work with at Red Cross and in your team. You know, a lot of RMIT students are very interested in working with the charity sector, and at a sort of at a departmental level, the economics group in particular is really well tied into various charities, as you know. But you know, what sort of grads are you looking for in your team? What sort of people would you hire? And if you could tell a student who is, say, in first year, what to focus on to eventually end up working in fundraising for the Red Cross, or really trying to understand the core business of the Red Cross. And I know sometimes charities don't like to think of the word business in the middle of it, but there is sort of transactions going on, and so there's business principles that are important. What would you recommend?
If you can find, if you can think of any job within the commercial world, you'll find the equivalent within the charity space. A charity does have, at its very fundamentals, a business. We need to have people who have an understanding of finance, who have a background in accounting, who have a background in law, because one of the topics for so many charities, just like the commercial world, is dealing with the consequences of data privacy and the risk of being hacked, which is a huge risk to any brand, but much more to a charity. And so we've got lawyers right now who are looking at ensuring we stay within the bounds of the Privacy Act, and ensuring that we are consistent. And so we have those lawyers who are working in the background. We've got the finance in the background. We've got marketers, of course. There's a very large marketing team within any charity who is keeping our brand up to date and front of mind of donors. We have in the fundraising, I'll probably say that there is a large number of people with a background in marketing, and there is an overlap between what you do as a fundraiser and what you would do in marketing. So a lot of the principles remain the same. My background, I studied 2 BAs. I did some finance and I did some law, and also a fine arts degree. So my background is quite varied. I've got that very creative side, I've got that very theoretical side, I've got the research side, and I've brought it all into one and found a very interesting niche for myself in my own career. I guess what I'm looking for, if we had a graduate role available, would be someone who has a global mindset. That is first and foremost. You need to have that global mindset of wanting to do good. You want to have a desire to have purpose in your career, and within the charity sector you'll find that. But yeah, you want to have a really broad number of skills. So whether you have insights into understanding audience, an understanding of the principles that are going on behind the scenes that are impacting decisions of individuals, so that business and that economics and that behavioral understanding, that psychology, that's going to be really, really helpful.
Great, that's really interesting. So it's basically most fields will find employment in a charity. That makes a lot of sense. I've been lucky enough to work with a few international NGOs like Red Cross. And what I find really fascinating is the amount of information, data that's collected. And I've been lucky enough to work with some of the analysts that sort of try to make sense of these data, which to people like me is fun.
Likewise.
So how do you guys, what do you guys do with data? How does the data that you collect from donors as well as where you work inform your practice? And what sort of people do you look for who can handle those data? And how important is data going to be into the future of the Red Cross and more broadly the charity sector?
Absolutely critical. Data is fundamental to understanding human behavior. So I have the absolute privilege of working very closely with a great team of data scientists and data analysts. And we use a whole range, or we're actually bringing in a whole range of new technology to support us in doing that even better. So we apply machine learning to predict donor behavior. So identifying those who are most highly qualified prospects to who are most likely to do a certain action in the future based on how similar they look to our existing donors. So that's something that's really quite interesting, and it's really boosting our fundraising by applying these machine learning models to our existing database, predicting certain actions, and then designing journeys for those audience types, nurturing those relationships, and then seeing the results. So for a recent appeal, it helped raise an extra $300,000 by applying that model and taking them along that journey.
That's incredible. Every time I hear about machine learning, everything that people are doing with it, I'm just blown away. For those students that are interested in understanding how this works in the background, machine learning are essentially a bunch of econometric models, so equations, with a bunch of variables, and you just sort of rerun basically regressions or estimations of the equation over and over again until you get really good fits. And because machines are so powerful, the machine learns which variables fit better than others, which is just wonderful. We use it a lot in the economic development space as well. to understand behavior. So it's just great to see the application of some of these techniques that are often, you would often think, oh, that's just academics might be doing it, but know that this is actually happening in industry, that it's happening in the Red Cross, and that it's helping is fantastic. How do you see the role of AI coming into this world of data analytics? Do you guys see, a lot of people are scared of AI. I think it's going to be complementary to a lot of what we do, especially in the data and analytics sort of space. Do you find, are you guys looking into AI and seeing what opportunities there are there, or maybe not yet?
Maybe not yet. I mean, I know there's a lot of confusion. There is a lot of confusion for me what the difference is between machine learning and AI is. For me, I see it's a significant overlap. Right now, it's just machine learning.
Right. Yeah. So AI is I guess takes a step further, right? So you would want AI to be able to not just learn about which variables are better, but to have greater insights as to, what the general model ought to look like, and take additional steps. But yeah, it's quite related, and it will help with some coding that people would do, and stuff like that as well. I see AI as the ultimate research assistant.
But it could also replace a lot of jobs. So there is a risk to it.
There is a risk. I think the advantages in learning, in having a set of skills that are transferable, so that AI becomes complementary to the work that we do and substitutes some of the tasks that we do at work, but not necessarily our jobs, because we will have other skills. Human to human skills are really hard to replace, but also that innate understanding of where you're thinking, which variable do I include in a model? Which one makes sense? Sometimes it's just pure intuition, and it's, even if you have data on sort of hair length of a donor, you may not want to include that. It might be entirely irrelevant, while some spurious correlation might tell the AI, no, hair length is really important. It's not. There's something else driving behind it. So this is where I think a person should come in and say, no, machine, not this time. That sort of understanding, I think, is crucial. Going forward, into how Red Cross operates a little bit. You talked about before people having an international mindset, and of course, Red Cross is, I think, literally all over the world, except maybe the South Pole. So how do you guys operate with other countries? Would a potential graduate have an opportunity to, say, work with teams in the Pacific or East Asia or Latin America? How does that work for you guys, and what opportunities there are in that space for people that are interested in, helping others, but also seeing the world?
Yeah, so Australian Red Cross is part of a global network of teams. So we're part of the International Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement. So there's Red Cross and there's Red Crescent. The Red Crescent tends to be in the Middle East. And Australian Red Cross is definitely part of an Asia Pacific network. And we do collaborate with different teams within the both Pacific and Asia. Most recently, we had an Asia Pacific conference of fundraisers, for example, who were getting together and sharing knowledge and insights. And you'll find that obviously all those external factors that go on, like cost of living, is very prominent here in Australia and also very prominent in the UK, but maybe not so much in the Pacific. So there are different factors and different learnings that you can share that they're experiencing that we're not, and things that we are and they're not, and just sharing that knowledge. And that's one of the primary benefits that I have of having a global team that I can rely on. You have a whole range of different understandings of what's going on. If they've gone through cost of living crises most recently, then I can rely on them to share their insights. So that's one of the benefits of working with a really global organization that does operate in pretty much every country around the world.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting, and it's really good to hear, because one of the things that AI will probably never be able to do is have that human-to-human interaction where we talk to a team from the UK or Vanuatu or Indonesia and see which experiences can apply or be contextualized to the Australian experience and vice versa. So that's fantastic. And of course, this is a very old way of sharing information in the sense that we've always been doing these things. So it's really good to hear that you guys are keeping it up. And I guess the proportion of online meetings and things like that has also increased. So COVID has been a facilitator of a lot of these things to some extent. So there's always a bit of a silver lining if
very few silver linings, but that is definitely one of them, where it has brought a lot more technology to bring communities together. It's definitely beneficial.
It is, yeah. Of course, technology has gaps, and not everyone benefits equally from technology. And some countries have different access to technology than we have here, and within countries you have those disparities. How does we do some work in inequality in this course, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you've seen. What's your experience looking at inequality, say within Australia or within other countries, and what do you think people should do about inequality? Often people care about poverty. Inequality is relative poverty, so it could be that everybody's getting richer. It's just some group is getting richer a lot faster, and that drives up inequality. But sometimes inequality is driven by the sort of bottom 5% getting poorer. So how important is inequality for the Red Cross, and what should we do about it if it is something that's crucial? I know it's a big question, but whatever comes to mind.
The very first thing that comes to mind is I think there's been a huge shift within the charity sector away from being that white savior, that I'm going to go in with all the knowledge and understanding of how to fix something without actually engaging with the population I'm trying to support. And so one of the things I see at Red Cross is that we have very much a desire to bring in people who have lived experience of dealing with inequality, of dealing with the negative impacts of living within a certain community within Australia. So, for example, we have a lot of people who have a lived experience of migration, lived experience of being a refugee and moving to Australia from a place that's been torn apart by conflict, or whether it's in terms of First Nations, the First Nations communities within Australia. We have a broad spectrum of individuals with a large understanding of what it's like to live in a poor community, of what it's like to live in an unequal world. And it's bringing everyone together to try and fix these challenges, rather than someone like me who is white, who thinks I can just walk in and have the answers. So I think that's fundamental to the shift within the charity sector.
Right. I've actually seen that across the sort of international space as well, as what you mentioned. It's a really interesting mindset. One of the things that you learn is that sometimes people that are in marginalized communities tend to have the answers to a lot of these things already. And it's just often a lack of capacity, sometimes even funds, to apply those answers. So a charity can play a supporting role in bringing those things forward. But often these things obviously will need some A/B testing. We will need to understand whether their ideas are good ideas. And we also need to understand that sometimes a program that may be rolled out in community A may not necessarily work in community B, because although they're similar on a lot of levels, they're intrinsically different as to how people respond to that, which I think behavioral economics plays a key role in understanding those differences then.
And having a culture of failure. Failure is okay, because you learn from failure and you just keep moving on.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And for students out there, I hope they take that to heart. If they ever encounter a test that they haven't done that well in, and sometimes we get quite upset, and which is fine. It is upsetting, but there's lessons, opportunities to learn what can I do different? What did I do wrong? Was I out the night before till 5 a.m.? These sort of things, and so therefore, a lot, failure is the mother of success, and it's good that we always take that approach to business and practice and charity and in government work in particular, although we can be a little bit less forgiving with government. I want to ask you one last question because I know I'm taking a long time, but I really enjoy talking to you. It's just government. So you're essentially a non-government organization. So people often don't know what that is. It's essentially organizations that help society, which stand outside of the government. But that doesn't mean that you don't deal with government. You must, because they set the stage for a lot of the activities that we do. How does the Red Cross deal with, domestically, but also internationally, with various governments, and what steps can, what role does diplomacy play in allowing the Red Cross to do a better job?
Yeah, I think Red Cross is in a unique position because there is actually legislation in place around Red Cross, and that is true internationally. So Red Cross is not part of government, but we do have a unique role with government. So there is legislation in Australia that sets out the role of Red Cross operating in Australia. But more broadly within the charity sector, it's more, it is absolutely critical to work with government. One, to get funding, because government does fund a lot of charities in terms of their international development work. So you need to have a really strong relationship with those, whether it's state or federal government. Also, in terms of the regulation, you need to have a really tight relationship with each government to ensure that you are remaining compliant with those requirements that are set out by the government, and whether it's diplomacy with that government, that's absolutely critical. So government relationships are, absolutely critical to every charity. In terms of diplomacy, so in terms of what the government does, is that your question?
Well, more, actually, I think you answered it. It was more related to the sort of relationships. So diplomacy, or I guess you can call it second-tier diplomacy between NGOs and government organizations, and how important that is. And I think you covered those things. Sometimes though, regulation really can work against various NGOs like Red Cross, and of course we've seen some recent cases in Afghanistan where basically women in NGOs were no longer allowed to work. That can be obviously devastating for a country and for the NGO. Do you have any thoughts about those sort of actions, and what can an international community that cares, because I care, what can we do to address some of these issues?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. From my understanding, a lot of those charities that were operating in Afghanistan have had to stop work because they were trying to build networks within families, to build networks with the women within those families. And if women weren't able to work for those charities, they couldn't actually build that network, and therefore they weren't actually able to work in the field. And so they've had to remove themselves because of the consequences of decisions made by the Taliban government. So that is, difficult. And I'm not really sure how the international community, in terms of NGOs, are going to respond to that. I think it ultimately becomes a question of, do we only return once it's actually feasible? And that's going to be a challenge. Obviously, it's not the role of NGOs to try and influence whether there is a certain type of government that's in control, that's outside the realms of our work. Sometimes we just have to work with what's available.
Right, that's interesting. Sometimes you do have to just be a bit pragmatic, I guess, and work with people that you won't necessarily would want to have dinner with. Yeah, that's of course true. All right, Lenny, I've taken so much of your time. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think I could go all day, but I know you have other things to do. So I want to thank you very, very much for your time here, and hope to see you in person in Melbourne. And if you ever come, let me know, and I will ask you a lot of other questions without cameras.
It's been a pleasure.
And yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. You have a great day. Take care.